For Sergeant John Harrison, every step toward the bank that morning was a step guided by routine and necessity. A 72-year-old decorated Army veteran, John had survived combat zones, but he wasn't prepared for the quiet insult waiting behind the teller window. When he handed over his monthly VA disability check, a lifeline that paid his rent, utilities, and medication, the young teller named Kevin stared at it like it was a counterfeit. "It looks irregular," he said flatly, sliding the check back. John was stunned. For over 20 years, he had deposited the same type of Treasury-issued check at this very branch without issue. But today, the rules had changed. Kevin, eager to enforce policy, cited risk management and the low balance in John's account as reasons for refusing to cash or deposit the check, insisting it would take 7 to 10 business days to clear. No matter how calmly John explained that this was his regular government-issued VA payment, his words fell on deaf ears. Kevin wouldn't budge. The check, issued by the Department of Veterans Affairs, was treated as suspect, and John, a man who had served his country with honor, was made to feel like a liability. Frustrated and disheartened, he stepped away from the counter, clutching what now felt like a worthless piece of paper, unsure how he would pay his rent due the next morning. A man who had never asked for special treatment now faced a bureaucratic wall he couldn't scale, until something unexpected changed everything. Sergeant John Harrison sat on a cold metal bench outside the bank, gripping his uncashed VA check like a lifeline slipping through his fingers. The bank he had trusted for over 2 decades had just turned him away. A young teller named Kevin had looked at his Treasury-issued VA disability payment, identical to the one he received every month, and labeled it irregular. Kevin's voice had been polite but firm, echoing with a sense of detached authority that left no room for appeal. He said the bank couldn't deposit the check immediately because John's account balance was too low to safely cover it if it bounced. Instead, he'd placed a 7 to 10 business day hold, citing risk management policies. John's explanations, that he was a veteran, that this was a standard benefit check, that rent was due tomorrow, were brushed off like meaningless noise. Kevin had already moved on to the next customer. Now, as traffic rushed past, John stared at the folded check in his hands. Rent was due the next morning, and this money was all he had. He had no savings, no safety net, just the carefully budgeted monthly payment that kept a roof over his head and lights on in his modest apartment. His chest ached, not from age or old war wounds, but from a rising tide of helplessness. How had it come to this? How had a decorated soldier who had served with distinction ended up pleading for basic access to the benefits he'd earned? John had always been a man of quiet strength. He didn't complain, didn't expect special treatment. He'd seen real hardship, combat tours, lost friends, injuries he still carried. Bureaucratic frustration was just another battle, but this one cut deeper. This wasn't about money alone. It was about dignity. Being turned away over a government check made him feel invisible, like his service meant nothing, like he was just another old man with a piece of paper nobody wanted to touch. His thoughts spun. The VA's hotline was notoriously slow. His landlord had already warned him once about late rent. He couldn't afford another delay. The fear of eviction crept in, tightening his chest. He'd never missed a rent payment in his life. Could he call someone? An old army buddy? Most were long gone or struggling themselves. His fingers trembled as he reached into his wallet for his worn VA ID, and that's when he saw it, a small card tucked behind his license. It was something he'd nearly forgotten about, handed to him years ago by a JAG officer during a messy appeal case. Veterans Financial Protection Task Force. It had a government seal and an unlisted number. With nothing left to lose, John made the call. The voice on the other end was calm, focused, and listened without interruption. Agent Davies of the VFPTF took his name, details of the situation, the bank's address, and the names of those involved. Her voice didn't express anger or outrage, just quiet resolve. "Please remain nearby, Sergeant Harrison," she said firmly. "A field agent is en route. Estimated arrival time 5 minutes or less." Then the line went dead. John blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. 5 minutes? It sounded impossible. But a flicker of hope stirred. He looked up toward the bank entrance, waiting, heart pounding, check still clutched tightly in his hand. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He was done being dismissed. In that moment, under the fading afternoon light, the burden of being forgotten didn't feel quite so heavy. Someone had listened. Someone was coming. And maybe, just maybe, justice would arrive, not in days or weeks, but in minutes. As John Harrison sat outside the bank, his thoughts still racing, the faded edges of the VA check digging into his weathered fingers, the small laminated card he pulled from his wallet felt like a lifeline. Veterans Financial Protection Task Force. He remembered the name vaguely. It had been handed to him by a JAG officer years ago during a frustrating tangle of paperwork over his disability rating. For emergencies only, the officer had said. John had filed it away, never truly believing he'd need it. But now, with rent due tomorrow and a teller refusing to deposit his check, it certainly felt like an emergency. His hands shook slightly as he dialed the number, more from the weight of hope than from fear. When the line connected, a calm, clear voice answered, VFPTF, Special Agent Davies speaking. How may I assist you? John drew a breath. This is Sergeant John Harrison, U.S. Army, retired. I just had my monthly VA disability check refused by Community First Bank, branch on Lincoln Avenue. They said it looked irregular. It's never happened before. I've been depositing these here for years. My rent's due tomorrow. I don't know what else to do. He paused, the frustration in his voice barely contained. The teller's name is Kevin. He said my balance was too low to safely cover it if the check bounced, even though it's from the U.S. Treasury. He told me it would be held for 7 to 10 business days. I need that money to stay in my home. Agent Davies didn't interrupt, didn't challenge his words. The only sound was the tapping of keys as she processed the information. Then, cool and composed, she said, Understood, Sergeant Harrison. Please confirm the full address of the bank and the name of the branch manager if you have it. John gave her the details, including the name he'd seen on the glass office door inside, Henderson. Thank you, she replied. Please stay near the bank if it's safe to do so. A field agent is already in motion and will arrive in approximately 5 minutes to assess the situation and ensure compliance with federal banking regulations concerning Treasury-issued veteran benefits. The call ended as abruptly as it began, but John didn't feel abandoned. Instead, he felt something powerful stir, a sudden shift in momentum. It had taken only a few minutes, but already he could sense that someone was taking him seriously, that his voice, dismissed so easily by the bank, had found its way to people who actually understood the stakes. For the first time all morning, a flicker of reassurance replaced the quiet dread that had been gripping him. Exactly 4 minutes later, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb, the kind used by federal investigators, plain, unmarked, but undeniably official. A man in a tailored dark suit stepped out and headed toward the bank with unhurried confidence. A moment later, a second agent emerged from the passenger side. John recognized her instantly from the call. Sergeant Harrison? She asked, extending her hand. I'm Agent Davies. Her tone was warm but professional, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to command authority. May I see the check? He handed it over, and she inspected it briefly. This is a standard, perfectly valid Treasury disbursement, she said without hesitation. There is absolutely nothing irregular about this check. She made a short call on a secured line, reciting check numbers, branch identifiers, and a set of instructions in clipped but clear terms. Effective immediately, she concluded, initiate administrative freeze on the personal accounts of manager Martin Henderson, pending review of compliance violations. She turned to John and gave him a small nod. Things are about to move quickly. Inside the bank, Agent Miller, the suited man from the sedan, had already walked directly into the branch manager's office. He introduced himself as a federal agent from the VFPTF, stated his purpose. The atmosphere inside Community First Bank shifted dramatically the moment the unmarked black sedan pulled up to the curb. Out stepped Special Agent Miller of the Veterans Financial Protection Task Force. His badge flashed with a quiet authority that silenced the nervous murmurs of the staff. Without a word to the tellers or customers, he strode straight through the lobby and into the branch manager's glass-walled office. Mr. Henderson, who had spent the previous 10 minutes pretending not to notice the scene with Sergeant John Harrison, barely had time to stand before Agent Miller entered without knocking. Mr. Henderson, Miller began, his voice calm but unmistakably firm, We need to discuss your branch's refusal to process a valid United States Treasury instrument issued to a disabled veteran. We will also be reviewing your handling protocols, 8A compliance, and staff training related to veteran benefits. As Miller spoke, Agent Davies, the calm, composed voice from the phone call, emerged from the same sedan and approached John Harrison at the bus stop bench. She introduced herself gently and asked to see the VA check in question. After a quick inspection, she nodded. "Standard, clean, no irregularities," she said, then made a swift call on a secure device. Within moments, the branch manager's personal bank accounts were frozen, pending an internal audit. The irony was poetic. The man who'd refused to trust a veteran's disability check now found his own assets under review. Harrison watched from outside as confusion turned to panic in the manager's office. Inside, Agent Miller was relentless. He questioned Henderson's knowledge of Treasury verification procedures, highlighting the manager's failure to override a junior teller's baseless judgment. Kevin, the teller who had denied Harrison's check, was called into the office and questioned under Agent Davies' supervision. He faltered quickly, admitting he hadn't truly understood the regulations, but had acted out of caution. That caution, as Davies noted coldly, had nearly caused a veteran to miss rent and lose his home. Henderson attempted to intervene, only to be reminded that under federal law, obstructing access to veteran benefits was not just a moral failure. It could carry legal consequences. Agent Davies then escorted Harrison back inside the bank, guiding him to a different teller window. She personally supervised the proper deposit of his check and ensured that funds were made immediately available. "No holds," she told the teller. "No excuses." The branch fell silent as customers and staff alike watched the agents carry out a swift, thorough correction of the injustice. Agent Miller handed Henderson a thick audit packet and outlined a mandatory retraining protocol for every employee in the branch, to be overseen directly by their task force. Henderson, now visibly shaken, nodded without protest, his previous authority gone. Before leaving, Agent Davies turned to the manager and said, "Sergeant Harrison will also require a formal written apology and a waiver of any penalties he may incur because of your staff's actions today. We suggest you issue that promptly." Henderson, pale and deflated, simply muttered his agreement. John Harrison walked out of the bank a different man than the one who had entered. He held no grudges in his heart, only quiet gratitude that someone had stood up when he couldn't. The system had flaws, yes, but on this day, the right part of the system had answered the call. A modest VA check had been the center of the storm, but it had awakened a force far more powerful than ignorance and policy, the quiet but unwavering shield of justice reserved for those who served. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the Harrison incident sent shockwaves through the banking industry. Community First Bank was forced to overhaul its entire policy framework for handling government-issued benefits, particularly those for veterans. Teller Kevin was terminated, and branch manager Henderson was reassigned to a non-customer-facing compliance role, his personal accounts still under internal review. A sweeping retraining initiative was launched across all regional branches, funded directly by the bank's corporate office. Public pressure and media scrutiny mounted, eventually prompting a federal review of how financial institutions process Treasury disbursements for vulnerable populations. But for Sergeant John Harrison, the outcome was far more personal. He paid his rent on time. He never missed a dose of his pain medication. Most importantly, he walked out of that bank with his dignity intact and a quiet belief that sometimes the system, when nudged by the right hands, can still work for the people it was meant to serve. This story reminds us that justice isn't just found in grand courtrooms or dramatic trials. It can unfold quietly at a bus stop bench, in the hands of those willing to listen and act. Veterans shouldn't have to fight for the benefits they've already earned. If we fail to respect them in everyday places like banks or clinics, we fail as a society. If you believe no veteran should ever be dismissed, denied, or disrespected, drop a comment saying, "Respect." And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories that defend dignity, spotlight quiet heroes, and remind us what real accountability looks like.